The highway through the Mojave didn't forgive mistakes. It didn't forgive a wrong turn taken 3 miles back because a 6-year-old needed to use the restroom, and the only exit was a sun-bleached service road that looped back on itself twice before spitting them out at a gas station that sat alone on the shoulder of Route 66, like a forgotten tooth. It didn't forgive a fuel gauge that had been hovering a hairbreadth above the red line for the last 11 miles, and it certainly didn't forgive a man who had left Phoenix on a Tuesday morning with $63 in his checking account, a car that drank premium, and the quiet, private arithmetic of a father who had been doing this kind of math for 4 years. Ethan Cole pulled the Accord into the pump lane at 11:47 inches the morning. The thermometer on the bank sign across the road read 108 degrees. The digital display had a cracked pixel in the zero, so the temperature flashed between 108 and 18 every other second, like the desert itself couldn't decide how serious it wanted to be. Lily was asleep in the back seat. She had fallen asleep somewhere between the wrong turn and the second loop of the service road, her cheek pressed against the window, her mouth slightly open, one sneaker on, and one sneaker dangling from her toes by the tip of the lace. She was 6 years old, and she had her mother's eyelashes long and dark and fanning out across her cheek like brushstrokes on pale paper. She had been awake most of the drive from Phoenix, asking questions the way children do, when they sense the air around them, carrying something heavy. Why are we going to Grandma's by the long way? Is the radio broken or just turned off? Baba, do you want me to be quiet for a while? He had told her she didn't have to be quiet. She had fallen asleep anyway. Ethan turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the settling silence. The AC clicked and ticked as it cooled. Through the windshield, the gas station shimmered slightly at the edges. The way all things did out here when the sun hit the concrete at this hour. There was a mini-mart behind the pumps with a hand-painted sign advertising ice-cold drinks and a closed-for-renovations notice taped crookedly over the left side door. The right side door appeared to be open. A fly strip hung from the overhang between the two doors, turning slowly. He looked at the fuel gauge, bone dry. He looked at his phone. The banking app showed $63.14. He needed to make it another 212 miles to his mother-in-law's house in Barstow, where Lily would spend 2 weeks while he drove back to Phoenix and worked 3 consecutive double shifts that would bring him close to current on the electric bill, which was 60 days past due. Gas would run him about $40 for the full tank if he used regular instead of premium, which the manual specifically warned against, but which was a warning he had been quietly ignoring for 6 months, because premium was a luxury that had become, like many things, theoretical. $40. He had 63. That left 23 for the drive back, which would require 2 more fill-ups, which meant he would arrive in Phoenix with approximately nothing, which was approximately what he had started with. He was doing this math when he heard Lily stir behind him. "Are we there?" "No, Bug. We stopped for gas." A pause. The sound of a sneaker hitting the car floor. "I'm thirsty." There was a water bottle in the cup holder between the seats. He had been rationing it for the last hour, offering her sips at intervals, the way they tell you to drink water during a long hike before you feel thirsty, not after. The bottle was empty now. He had finished the last of it himself 40 minutes ago, without realizing it, tipping it back while reading a road sign, and had held the empty bottle over his mouth for a moment, catching nothing, then set it back down. "I know," he said. "Let me get the gas, and then we'll find you something cold, okay?" "Okay." She said it without complaint. That was the part that got him, sometimes. The okay. The way she said it, like she trusted the plan, like her job was only to confirm receipt of the information, and his job was to handle the rest. 4 years of single parenthood, and she had become easy about things that other children her age made difficult, waiting, adjusting, trusting the routine. He didn't know if that was resilience or if it was something else, something he couldn't name without feeling it land in the center of his chest. He got out of the car. The heat was immediate and total, the kind that didn't build but arrived all at once like a physical fact. He was wearing a gray t-shirt that had already started to darken at the collar before he'd even reached the pump. He slid his debit card into the reader, selected regular, punched in his PIN, and waited. The pump screen flickered. A small icon appeared that he had seen before, a spinning wheel. Then nothing, then the word declined in capital letters that felt louder than they needed to be. He stood there for a moment. He tried again. Same pin, same sequence. He went to the mini-mart door, the right one, the open one, and a blast of cold air hit him as he stepped inside. The interior was dim after the blinding outside, and it took his eyes a second to adjust. A display of candy bars ran along one wall. A humming cooler behind a low-glass case held a row of water bottles and Gatorade, and a few energy drinks with names like Fury and Apex. Behind the register, a young man in a neon yellow vest that said Team Porter across the back was leaning against the counter with his phone face up, watching something, earbuds in one ear. Ethan waited. The attendant didn't look up. "Excuse me," Ethan said. The attendant removed one earbud slowly, like he was being asked something unreasonable. "Cards being declined at the pump," Ethan said. "Can I run it inside instead?" "Sometimes it goes through that way." The attendant looked at him for a moment. He was maybe 22. With sunburned forearms and the particular kind of boredom that settles into a person when they've worked a job for long enough to stop seeing the people in front of them. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the card. He looked back at his phone. "Machine inside's the same machine as outside," he said. "If it declined out there, it'll decline in here. I understand that, but sometimes there's a processing lag. $40 minimum on the pump anyway. Cards declined, man." He put the earbud back in. Ethan kept his voice level. "My daughter is in the car. It's 108 degrees. I need to get gas to get to Barstow. Is there a manager I can speak with?" The attendant looked up again, slower this time. Something had shifted in his expression, not sympathy, something closer to appraisal. He looked Ethan up and down once, the way people do when they're trying to determine the category a person belongs to. "You got cash?" "I have $63. "Then why's your card declining on $40? It was a fair question asked in an unfair tone. Ethan felt the familiar sensation of a situation sliding, the way conversations could develop a tilt and begin moving in a direction before anyone in them had chosen that direction. "There may be a hold from a different transaction," he said. "If I can use the phone or step outside for 2 minutes to call the bank. "Gonna have to ask you to move the car if you're not pumping," the attendant said, nodding toward the window where the Accord sat at the pump. "Got other customers?" There were no other customers. The SUV pulled in while Ethan was standing outside the pump with his phone to his ear, waiting on hold with the bank's automated line. It was a black Cadillac Escalade, recent model, with tinted windows and the kind of road cleanliness that suggested it had been washed recently and driven carefully. It pulled into the pump lane beside his Accord with the precision of someone accustomed to not having to wait for things. Lily was awake now, sitting up in the back seat, watching him through the glass. She had her stuffed rabbit, a threadbare gray thing she called Mister, pressed against her chin. Her eyes tracked him the way children's eyes track their parents in uncertain situations. Steady, quiet, taking inventory. He smiled at her through the window and held up one finger. "One more minute." She nodded solemnly. The hold music on the bank line continued. The driver's door of the Escalade opened, and a woman stepped out. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, in a charcoal blazer. Despite the heat, dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested it had been done carefully this morning and had maintained its shape through will rather than circumstance. She wore no jewelry except small gold studs and carried a phone in one hand and a leather portfolio in the other, and she moved with the particular efficiency of someone whose calendar existed in 15-minute increments and who had recently decided that every moment outside those increments was a personal affront. She looked at the pump situation, Ethan's car at one pump. His position slightly away from the car, phone pressed to his ear with the expression of someone performing a rapid assessment. She walked past him toward the mini-mart door. The attendant came out before she reached it, apparently having noticed the Escalade, in a way he had not noticed the Accord, and opened the door from the inside, with a practiced smile that was completely different from the expression he'd used with Ethan. "Fill it up for you, ma'am?" "Please," she said, without breaking stride. "Yes, ma'am." He turned briefly, almost as an afterthought, back toward Ethan. "Look, We really do need that pump. If you're not, I'm calling the bank, Ethan said quietly. Yeah, but 2 minutes. The woman paused. She had been about to step inside, but something had made her turn, perhaps the brevity of the exchange, the compression of it, the way Ethan had said 2 minutes with the particular flatness of a man who was not asking. She looked at him fully for the first time. She took in the gray t-shirt, the old car, the child in the back seat, the empty water bottle, visible through the window. Is there a problem here? She said. It wasn't a question with warmth in it. It was the kind of question that meant, is this going to delay me? No problem, Ethan said. You're blocking the pump. I'll be 2 minutes. Something crossed her face, not quite impatience. Something more refined than that. The slight tightening of someone who has made a great number of decisions in a short period of time and is beginning to find other people's inability to make decisions irritating at a molecular level. I have a meeting in 40 minutes that requires me to be in Palm Springs, she said. Not personally relevant, I understand, but contextually. Ma'am, the attendant said, eager to be useful in this new direction. I can have him move the car while he figures out his payment situation. I'm not moving the car, Ethan said. Not loudly, not belligerently. Just stated. The way you would state a fact about geography. The attendant blinked. The woman looked at Ethan again, differently this time. From inside the car, Lily's voice came small and clear through the slightly open window. Baba? Are you okay? Ethan turned and looked at her. I'm okay, Bug. Almost done. He turned back to his phone. The hold music had stopped. A human voice was saying his name, asking for his account number. He turned slightly away from the pump and began to speak quietly into the phone. Behind him, the attendant muttered something to the woman that Ethan didn't catch. The woman said nothing. He heard the sound of her steps on the concrete, not retreating, not moving toward him, just still, like she'd stopped in an unexpected place and hadn't yet decided where to go next. The bank told him what he already knew. The card was valid, the account had funds. The transaction had been flagged for a fraud hold because of an out-of-area purchase pattern. The hold would release in 24 to 48 hours, or he could visit a branch in person to expedite. There was no branch, not out here, not for another 70 miles. He thanked the agent and hung up. He stood for a moment with the phone at his side, in the terrible heat, doing the math again the way he had been doing it all morning, the way he'd been doing it, in one form or another, for 4 years. $63. 212 miles. A child who was thirsty and hadn't complained. He turned back to the attendant. What's the cheapest way to get enough gas to make it to Barstow? The attendant had a manager. The manager was a heavy-set man in his 50s named Vernon Pruitt, with a sun-damaged neck and a Porter Gas Corp polo shirt that had been through too many washes. He came out of the mini-mart, chewing something, and looked at the situation with the weary expertise of a man who dealt with similar situations several times a week and had a policy about all of them. $30 minimum, Vernon said. Card, cash, or mobile pay. No tabs, no holds, no exceptions. Posted policy. I understand, Ethan said. I'm asking if there's a way to purchase a partial amount in cash while I work out the card issue. I have $30 in cash on me. He had 28, actually, but the $2 discrepancy felt manageable. I can pay the rest by mobile transfer once the hold clears. Vernon looked at him. Mobile transfer when? 24 hours, maybe less. So you want $30 of gas now, and a promise of the rest later. Yes, from a stranger. I understand how that sounds. No tab, Vernon said. Posted policy. The woman was still standing near her Escalade. She had her portfolio open against the hood and was reading something. Or appearing to read something. Ethan couldn't tell which. The attendant was pretending to wipe down a pump handle. 3 other cars had come and gone from other lanes in the time this conversation had taken. The normal machinery of the station proceeding around them like a river around a stone. Lily had rolled down the window 2 inches and was resting her chin on the glass edge. The stuffed rabbit's ears poked up above the doorframe. Can I at least purchase a water for my daughter while I figure this out? Ethan asked. He took out his wallet, actual leather, but old, worn thin, the kind that had been carried in the same pocket for years, and found a $5 bill folded behind his license. Vernon took the 5 without comment and went back inside. He came out with a large Gatorade green, not water, but cold, and held it out without meeting Ethan's eyes. Change is inside. Keep it, Ethan said. He walked to the car and passed the Gatorade through the window. Lily's hands found it immediately, both hands, the way children take hold of things they've been wanting, and she brought the bottle to her mouth and drank. He watched her throat move. He watched her eyes close briefly with the relief of cold liquid in the heat. "Thank you, Baba," she said. "Of course." He stood there with his hand on the car roof for a moment, the metal burning under his palm, and tried to think clearly. He was not a man prone to panic. He had trained that out of himself in the years after Claire, because a man with a 6-year-old could not afford to panic, could not afford to go sideways in a hardware store parking lot, could not afford to stare at the ceiling at 2 in the morning when there were lunches to pack and permission slips to sign, and a small person whose sense of security was, in its entirety, built around the fact that he was still standing. He thought about calling his mother-in-law. She had money. She would send it without hesitation, without the small wincing sound she sometimes made when she sent it. The sound that wasn't judgment, but was adjacent to it, in a way he'd stopped trying to parse. The transfer would take hours. He needed gas now. He thought about calling his friend Marcus in Tempe, who had floated him money before, and would do it again. Same problem, same hours. He was running through options when he heard the attendant's voice behind him, a different register than before. Lower, almost uncertain. "Hey man, can I get your name?" "For the transaction log." "If you're going to. I mean, if the manager okays a partial, I need a name." Ethan turned around. "Cole," he said. "Ethan Cole." He watched the attendant write it on his notepad. Standard. Routine. Then watched the pen slow. Watched the man look at what he'd written. Then, look up. "Wait," the attendant said. It wasn't an aggressive word. It was involuntary, the word that comes out when the mind gets ahead of the mouth. "What?" Ethan said. The attendant was looking at his notepad, then at Ethan, then back at the notepad. His expression had done something strange. Rearranged itself into something younger and less sure than the boredom it had been wearing all morning. "Hold on," he said, and went inside. Vernon came out 2 minutes later with the attendant behind him. He was holding a tablet, the inventory system, Ethan assumed, or possibly the employee portal, and his expression had gone from weary professional to something harder to read. Tight around the eyes. "Careful. You said your name is Ethan Cole," Vernon said. "Yes." "From Phoenix?" "Yes." Vernon looked at the tablet, looked at Ethan. "You got ID on you?" Ethan took out his wallet again and produced his driver's license. Arizona, with the sun-faded stripe that came from being taken out too many times. Vernon held the license next to the tablet, tilting it against the glare. He was quiet for a long time. Behind Ethan, a car pulled out of another pump lane and drove away. The fly strip between the mini-mart doors turned once in the hot draft from the engine. "What's going on?" Ethan said. Vernon lowered the tablet and looked at him with an expression Ethan couldn't categorize. It was not the expression of a man applying a posted policy. It was the expression of a man recalibrating the entire morning. "Our station," Vernon said slowly, "is a Porter Gas Corp franchise." "You know what Porter Gas Corp is?" "I know what it is," Ethan said. "Then you know who." Vernon stopped. Started again. "Are you that Ethan Cole?" Ethan said nothing. Because the system, Vernon's voice had lost its official register entirely. It was just a man now, talking. "Our system has a ledger, goes back to the founding. There's a name in the preferred accounts registry that never got removed. From before the company restructured. The original preferred account. From 2009. The heat pressed down. The fly strip turned. "The name on that account," Vernon said, and stopped again. From behind Ethan, a different voice. "What name?" The woman Ava Sinclair, though Ethan did not know that yet, had crossed the concrete without either of them noticing. She was standing 7 feet away with her portfolio closed under her arm, and she was looking at Vernon with the focused attention of someone who had just heard a frequency she recognized and needed to locate its source. Vernon looked at her. He seemed to be uncertain which direction to face the man in front of him or the woman behind. "Ma'am, this is a private. What name is on the account?" she said again. Her voice was not loud. It had the quality of a question that expected to be answered. Vernon's mouth opened, and then he just turned the tablet around and let her see it. Ethan watched her face. He had seen that expression before, not on her face, but the expression itself. The particular sequence of it. The way understanding arrived in stages rather than all at once. First, the recognition, then the processing, then the recalibration, then the silence that followed the recalibration like an echo. He watched all 4 stages happen. She looked at the tablet. She read what was on it, not quickly, but the way you read something twice because you don't trust the first reading. She looked up at Ethan. She looked back at the tablet, and then she did something he hadn't expected. She looked down at her own portfolio, opened it, and turned to a specific tab with the speed of someone who had done that particular motion in meetings 100 times. Her hand stopped. The page she was looking at, he couldn't see the content, only the format, the columns and headers of a document that looked like a corporate record, a founding document, something historical. Her index finger landed on a line halfway down the page and stayed there. Her pen fell. It hit the concrete with a small click and rolled 2 inches toward the pump base. Nobody picked it up. The attendant looked at Vernon. Vernon looked at Ava. Ava looked at Ethan with an expression that had evacuated entirely of its previous contents, the efficiency, the schedule, the 40-minute window, and was now simply open, unguarded in the way faces become when the organizing principle of the moment has been removed. "You're alive," she said. The words came out quiet enough that the desert almost took them. Lily, in the back seat, had stopped drinking her Gatorade. She was watching through the window with large, dark eyes, the stuffed rabbit's ears visible at the bottom of the frame. Ethan looked at the woman. He looked at the pen on the ground. He looked at the tablet Vernon was still holding with both hands, slightly away from his body, like something that had become unexpectedly significant. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence confirmed everything she had said. It was 15 minutes before anyone said anything of substance. And those 15 minutes were the strangest 15 minutes Ethan Cole had experienced in a very long time, which was saying something. Vernon had gone inside. The attendant had followed him, not because he was asked to, but because the pull of the situation inside was stronger than any reason to stay out. Ava Sinclair stood at her pump and stared at her portfolio and did not move. Ethan sat on the hood of his Accord, the metal burning through his jeans, which he ignored, and looked at the highway and thought about nothing specifically. Lily had climbed into the front seat and was sitting beside him through the open passenger window, her chin on her hands on the window edge, watching the woman watch her portfolio. "Who is she?" Lily asked quietly. "I don't know her name," Ethan said. "She looks like she saw a ghost." He glanced at his daughter. "Where'd you learn that expression?" "Grandma says it." He looked back at the highway. "Yeah, something like that." Ava Sinclair was the CEO of Meridian Energy Solutions. He knew this without knowing her name, because he knew the company. He knew it the way a person knows the outline of something they built before it was called anything, before it had a logo or a fleet of Escalades or a CEO. He knew it from the architectural blueprints up, from the first servers in a garage in Scottsdale, from the 18-month period in 2008 and 2009, when the founding concept, a distributed energy management platform for commercial infrastructure, had seemed either visionary or delusional depending on which day of the week you asked him. He had stopped asking himself that question in 2013, when he left. He had not followed the company's trajectory after that. He had made a deliberate choice not to. The way you make a deliberate choice not to drive past an old house. You know it's there. You know the bones of it. You just don't need to see what someone else has done with the walls. But he knew the company had survived. He knew it had grown. He knew from a phone call from a former colleague 3 years ago, taken in a parking lot while Lily napped in the car, 10 minutes long, and carefully vague on both sides, that Meridian had become the kind of company whose name appeared in infrastructure articles about the Southwestern energy grid. He had not known who ran it. He had not thought, in 11 years, that the running of it would ever become a fact that intersected with his life. Ava came to stand near the front of the car, not close 6 feet away, on the concrete, with her portfolio at her side. She had composed herself. Whatever the open expression was, had been reorganized into something more controlled, though the control had a visible effort to it that hadn't been there before. "I'm Ava Sinclair," she said, "CEO of Meridian Energy Solutions." "I know what Meridian is," he said. "I know you do." A pause. "You built it. I helped build it." "There were others. The others didn't build what you built." Another pause. Longer. "The others are still at the company. They'll tell you the same thing if you ask them." Lily had gone still. She was looking at the woman with the focused attention of a child who understands that something is happening that the adults haven't explained, but that feels important. "What happened to you?" Ava asked. It was not a small question. "Nothing dramatic," Ethan said. "I left. You disappeared." "I left quietly." "There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment. "There was a story," she said carefully. "About why you left. About financial irregularities. About—" "I know what the story was," he said. His voice stayed level. "I know who told it." She was quiet. "It wasn't true," he said. "But it was told at a moment when my wife had been dead for 3 months, and I had a 2-year-old, and fighting it would have cost me everything I had left that was worth keeping." He looked at the highway again. "So I didn't fight it. I left." The fly strip between the mini-mart doors turned once in a warm draft from the south. Lily's hand appeared on the car door frame and rested there, just resting, not asking anything. Ethan put his hand over hers briefly, then moved it back. She had joined Meridian in 2016, Ava told him. 3 years after he left. She had come in as chief operating officer when the previous leadership had restructured following what she described, with practiced neutrality, as a difficult period of internal transition. She had become CEO in 2019. She had heard the story about him. Everyone at Meridian had heard it. It was company history by the time she arrived, the cautionary mythology that organizations sometimes build around their own difficult chapters. A founding member who had allegedly taken money, who had disappeared before a formal investigation concluded, who had not contested anything publicly and had not been heard from since. "When did you start doubting it?" Ethan asked. She answered without hesitation. "When I looked at the original architecture, the original platform design." She paused. The financial irregularity story had a logic to it. People steal, people take credit, but the engineering on what you built, I spent 6 months inside those original files when we were redesigning the core platform in 2020. And the work I found in there, the way it was constructed, the annotations in the code, the thinking in the margins. She stopped. People who think that way don't also embezzle from a startup. It doesn't fit. You're making assumptions. "I'm pattern matching," she said. "It's what I do." He looked at her for a moment, then he looked at Lily, who had retreated to the back seat and was eating a granola bar from the emergency bag, with the focused attention of a child who has decided to let the adults have their conversation. "What do you want?" he asked Ava. "Right now?" She paused again, as if genuinely considering the question. "Right now, I want to make sure your car has enough gas to get to wherever you're going." She looked at his tank. "And after that, I'd like to have a longer conversation about what happened in 2013 and whether there's anything I can do to address it." "The story can't be unwritten," he said. "No. But it can be contradicted, formally, by the company that told it." She held his gaze. "That's in my power to do. If you want it." He had started at Meridian, which wasn't called Meridian then, which was called nothing then because it was a concept and a server and 3 people in a garage in Scottsdale in January of 2008. The concept was his, technically. Although he would never have used that word because nothing in engineering is one person's. Not really. Not in the way that a painting is one person's. It was a distributed energy management platform software that could sit between commercial buildings and the grid and optimize usage in real time, responding to pricing signals, demand patterns, local conditions, the kind of platform that seemed obvious in retrospect and seemed insane in 2008, when the energy market was structured the way it was, and the sensors that would make the real-time optimization possible were just becoming cheap enough to deploy at scale. He had worked on it for 5 years. He had slept in the office many nights in the first 2 years. He had recruited the engineers who built the infrastructure that made it real, Marcus Chen, who had joined them from Stanford and who wrote the load-balancing algorithm that was still, 12 years later, the heart of the system, Susan Wheeler, who had designed the client interface with a clarity that made everyone else's work look better than it was. David Park, who had run the hardware integration and who Ethan knew, in the back of his mind, had been the one who told the story about the financial irregularities. He knew this the way you know the source of weather, not from a specific observation, but from the pattern of what followed and who benefited. He had married Claire in 2010. She had been a structural engineer working on a commercial project that used an early version of the platform, and they had met at a conference in Denver where he had been presenting, and she had been asking questions that were more technically informed than most of the questions he got from architects. She had been good at everything she did with a kind of practical ease that he had found, in the 2 years they had together before Lily was born, to be the most reliably comforting thing he had ever known. Not the showy competence of someone who needed to be seen being capable, but the quiet competence of someone who simply knew what she was doing and did it. She had died in November of 2012. A car accident on I-10. A Tuesday evening. A truck that ran a red light. He had been at the office. He had learned about it from a phone call. He did not talk about this often. He had no framework for it that he trusted in conversation, no set of sentences that could carry what it actually was without becoming, in the transportation, something else. He knew the phrases, sudden loss, tragic accident, moved forward for the sake of our daughter, and he knew they were true, the way maps are true, accurate in shape but silent on the texture of the territory. David Park's conversation about the financial irregularities had happened in February of 2013, 3 months after Claire's death. The timing, he had decided, was not coincidental. A grieving man with a 2-year-old and a company he no longer had the capacity to run at the level the moment required was a man who could be edged out without much force. He did not think David Park was evil. He thought David Park was ambitious and opportunistic, and had identified a window and moved through it, and that the people who heard the story tired people. Investors who needed clean narratives. A board that wanted resolution had found it easier to believe than not to believe. He had left without fighting because fighting would have required him to be, for months or years, primarily the person being wronged rather than primarily the father of a 2-year-old named Lily. That was the calculation. He had made it, and he had not. In 4 years of subsequent difficulty, the money problems, the job changes, the careful, quiet work of building a life that was smaller than the one he'd expected but real and present, and he had not regretted it. He explained none of this to Ava Sinclair in the parking lot of a desert gas station. He told her the outline. The outline was enough. She was quiet for a long time after he finished. David Park left the company in 2021, she said finally. Ethan said nothing. He was asked to leave. Different reasons, different context. She paused. But I want you to know, I'm not unaware of the history there. It doesn't change anything about my life, Ethan said. What he did, what happened to him after. None of it changes the 4 years. No, she agreed. It doesn't. The honesty of this, the lack of a reassuring pivot, the direct acknowledgement of irreversibility, was more than he had expected from her. He looked at her with slightly different attention. Vernon had come back out at some point during this conversation and filled Ethan's tank without being asked, without discussion of payment, with the wordless decision-making of a man who had received enough ambient information to understand that the policy he had been applying did not cover this situation. Ethan watched him do it and said nothing. Because the thank you he owed Vernon was the straightforward kind that didn't require elaboration. Ava had offered, in the course of the longer conversation, several things. A formal retraction of the 2013 narrative issued through Meridian's communications team, framed as a historical correction, with whatever specificity would be most useful. A conversation with the company's current board, if he wanted it, not because he was owed board time, but because there were people there who had been there since the founding years, and who she thought would want to have that conversation, and a role, if he wanted it. Not charity packaged. Not the kind of offer that came wrapped in apology, and therefore required him to accept it in a posture of gratitude. A specific consulting engagement on a platform redesign they were undertaking, the core load management architecture, which had been built on the bones of what he'd originally designed, and which had accrued, in 12 years of patches and additions, the kind of structural ambiguity that eventually needed to be addressed from first principles. "You know what's in there," she said, "better than anyone we could hire." "I'm not a consultant," he said. "What are you?" "An electrical engineer. I work for a commercial contractor in Phoenix." "Good work?" "Honest work," he said, "which is what I needed it to be." She nodded. "I'm not asking you to give that up. The engagement could be structured around your schedule. It doesn't have to be more than you want it to be." He looked at the highway. A semi passed, slow in the heat, its trailer shimmering. "Why?" he asked. "Because it's right," she said. "And because the platform has a problem in the second-tier load distribution layer that 3 different engineering teams have looked at in the last 2 years, and none of them have been able to locate. I've read your original notes on that system. I think you'd find it in an afternoon." He was quiet. "Also," she said, "and this is purely personal, not professional. I drove past your car before I pulled in, and I saw your daughter with an empty water bottle in a 108-degree car, and I came in here and told you to move your vehicle." She said this without deflection, meeting his eyes. "I'd like that to not be the last interaction we have," she said. It was a strange form of apology. It didn't dress itself in apology language, and it didn't ask for absolution. It just stated a preference and let it sit. Lily had appeared at the passenger window again, resting her chin on her arms. She looked at the woman for a moment. "Your pen is on the ground," she told Ava. Ava looked down. The pen, silver, good. The kind that came in a box, was still where it had landed, 2 inches from the pump base. She picked it up. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Lily considered her for a moment. "You look less scared now." Ava smiled, the first one Ethan had seen from her, and it changed her face considerably. "I suppose I am." They left at 12:40. 1 inches the afternoon. The tank was full. Lily had a second Gatorade that Vernon had pressed on her with the particular generosity of a man trying to restore a balance he felt responsible for disturbing, and she held it with both hands and watched the desert unspool through the window with the quiet contentment of a child who has been fed and watered and was now merely required to exist in a moving vehicle. Ethan had Ava Sinclair's card. He had taken it without comment, without commitment, without the performance of gratitude that the moment might have invited if he'd been a different kind of man. He had taken it because it was a fact to deal with later, in a context that was not a gas station in 107-degree heat, in a setting where he could think clearly about what he wanted to do and what he didn't. He had shaken Vernon's hand before he left. Vernon had gripped his hand with both of his, which was a different gesture from any that had preceded it that morning, and had said, in the low voice of a man speaking privately in a public place, "I'm sorry about earlier." "You were doing your job," Ethan said. "I was doing it wrong," Vernon said. Ethan had no good answer for that, because it was true, and because the correction didn't require his input. He had nodded and gotten in the car. Now he drove. The highway unrolled ahead of them, straight and wide in the flat desert light. The AC worked steadily. The fuel gauge sat solidly in the upper half of the dial, which was a small and uncomplicated pleasure that he let himself feel without analysis. The sky was the specific shade of blue that only existed out here, deep and enormous, and perfectly still, the kind of sky that made the scale of everything else legible. He was 17 miles out when Lily spoke. "Bubba." "Yeah." "That lady." The one with the portfolio. Mim. She looked at you like she recognized you. A pause. The sound of the Gatorade bottle being set in the cup holder. Like when you run into someone from a long time ago, and you can't remember where you know them from. Something like that, he said. But she did remember. She did. Who were you to her? Lily asked. He thought about how to answer this. He thought about the garage in Scottsdale in January of 2008. And the whiteboard covered in his handwriting. And Marcus Chen falling asleep at his desk, with a protein bar still in his hand, and Claire calling at 10:30 at night to tell him the building he'd never seen was about to use the first real deployment of the platform, and it was working. She was watching it work in real time on her laptop, and the particular sound of her voice when she said it, which was not excitement exactly, more like the sound of recognizing something true. He thought about all of it, the full weight of it, the way it was simultaneously distant 11 years, a different life and immediate, still present in the way that things you build never quite leave you. I made something once, he said. She works with it. Lily considered this. Like your drawings. For the buildings? Bigger than that, but the same idea. Did she like it? I think so, he said. Did she tell you that? In her way. Another long pause. The highway stretched. A hawk turned slowly in a thermal above the rocks to the east, riding the heat without effort. Are you important? Lily asked. I mean, like, are you famous? Like, should I know about what you made? He smiled at the highway. No, but she thought you were important. People can think different things, he said. Lily made a small, contemplative sound. She retrieved her Gatorade and drank some. She looked out the window at the passing desert, the creosote and the rock, and the occasional Joshua tree. Those strange forked shapes standing in the heat, like visitors from a drier century. Baba, she said finally. Are you somebody? He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. I'm your dad. Lily absorbed this with the seriousness it deserved. She turned it over the way children turn over answers that are shaped differently from what they expected. Not wrong, just a different shape. I know that, she said finally. But I meant like to other people. He thought about Ava Sinclair's face when she saw the name on the tablet. The pen hitting the concrete, the way the entire station had become, for a minute, a different kind of place than it had been before, charged with a recognition that had nothing to do with any of them except him, and that he hadn't asked for, and hadn't sought, and that had found him anyway, the way things sometimes did, in the most ordinary of circumstances, in the middle of the desert on a Tuesday in July. He thought about what it meant to have built something that had lasted, that had survived his own absence, that had grown into a thing large enough to have a CEO and an Escalade and a board and a problem in the second-tier load distribution layer that 3 engineering teams couldn't locate. He thought about the fact that none of the survival, the growth, the scale, had reached him. That he had lived these 4 years in Phoenix, working honest work, doing the school runs and the grocery runs and the double shifts when the electric bill came due, and the thing he had built had continued without him in the way that rivers continue without the people who first mapped them. He didn't feel cheated by this. He had felt cheated once, in 2013, when the story was being told and the window was closing. He had done his grieving. On that account he had done it quietly, in the way he did most things, at odd hours and without audience, and it was over. What he felt now was something else. Not pride exactly. More like recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has done good work and has not been diminished by the fact that the credit for the work went elsewhere, because he has always known the work was good and has never needed anyone else to confirm it. I don't know, he said honestly. To other people, I'm something different depending on who's asking. Lily seemed satisfied by this, or satisfied enough, which at 6 was the same thing. She turned back to the window. The desert continued its long, patient extension in every direction, unchanged by any of it. I think you're important, she said. For what it's worth, he smiled. It's worth a lot, he said. The Accord moved down the highway through the afternoon heat, carrying its 2 passengers through the vast, indifferent, beautiful desert toward Barstow. Toward a grandmother who would open the door before they knocked, toward 212 miles of road that he now had enough gas for with miles to spare. Behind them, the gas station grew small in the rearview mirror. Then smaller. Then became only a shape. Then became nothing at all. He drove. The sky was enormous and perfectly still, and very blue. Lily put her bare feet up on the dashboard, something he usually told her not to do, and he didn't say anything. Some days you let the small things go.